We are going to listen to Flore Gubert. Here she is, Flore. So Flore Gubert is a senior researcher in economics at the Institute of Research for Development, IRD, and she is associate member of Paris School of Economics. She is also vice president of the executive board of the Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme. And part of her research focuses on migration in West Africa. She is currently involved in two projects on climate change and migration. The one she is going to discuss with us now, Habitable, and another one on irregular migration in Gambia, Info Mig Train. Flore, the floor is yours.
Right. Okay, well, thanks Lisa, for offering me the opportunity to present this paper, which is joint work with Dimitri de France and Esther Delessal. So as you said, this paper is part of the Edge 2020 project entitled Linking Climate Change, Habitability and Social Tipping Points, Scenarios for Climate Migration, which has just started, and which is coordinated by the University of Liège. So this project gathers 21 partners from 18 countries with a wide range of expertise in climate and environmental science, human mobility, and so on. So very basically, the project aims at improving our understanding of the current interlinkages between climate impacts and migration and displacement patterns, and to try to solve some of the puzzles that has just been mentioned by Laurie. The project is built around two key concepts, that of habitability, as I said, and that of social tipping points. That is, points where, due to climate change and in combination with other factors or not, socio-ecological systems break down and are no longer perceived as being inhabitable, leading to migration. So the starting point of the research is the existence of non-linearities within the climate change migration nexus. There is evidence indeed that big climate impacts do not always result in bigger migration flows, while small changes in rainfall sometimes result in large migration and displacements. So this suggests that habitability does not solely depend on climate parameters, but also on a number of factors that will affect how people perceive the habitability of the area they reside in, their vulnerability and adaptive capacities, the vulnerability of their place of residence, their agency in migration decision, and so on. So the main objective of the project is to produce quantitative and qualitatively derived scenarios of future migration patterns and dynamics in order to get prepared and in order to embed climate migration in development planning. So the present paper on Mali is a step in that direction, right? So its purpose is to offer the first exploration of how, in recent decades, migration flows have been influenced by climate events in order to anticipate what might happen in the future. Most importantly, the question it tries to answer to is not only do climate anomalies end up in increased mobility, but also under which conditions do climate anomalies translate into increased mobility. So yeah, so be aware that it is a very first step. The objective for the next coming months is to push a bit further these analyses in order to identify, based on a very detailed, highly disaggregated risk and vulnerability mapping exercise, and on existing migration patterns likely to be in and out migration hotspots within Mali in the next decades. Why did we choose Mali? Well, we choose Mali for different reasons. That makes it an interesting case to focus on. First, as I'm sure you know, you're aware of, Mali's economy heavily relies on agriculture, okay? Very quick figures, if you consider crop producers and livestock breeders together, no less than 2/3 of the population, of the Malian population, is engaged in agriculture. Another feature is the fact that agricultural production is strongly dominated by rain-fed production, right? And so cultivated areas that are irrigated are only a small share of cultivated areas. And as a result, you have a very strong dependency of agricultural production with rainfall data, as suggested by the graph that you have on the slide. A third feature of Mali is its size, right? And given its big size, Mali is characterized by the diversity of agroecological zones. You have the desert on the north, the Sahelian center, and the Sudanese south, with very different level of precipitation per year, which makes it possible to test for difference in migratory responses to climate anomalies depending on affected individuals' place of residence. Fourth and last feature is the fact that Mali has been characterized by large migration movement for several decades, not only at the international level, but also at the internal level, right? So at the international level, just one figure, in 2010, about 6% of Malians were living abroad, which is probably an underestimate of the number of immigrants. And within Mali, according to the latest census of the population, internal migrants represented, so in 2009, yes, 16% of the Mali's population. Right. Yes, so let me maybe skip this. It just gives you another view of where Malian migrants abroad are, in which country, and you see that Côte d'Ivoire is one of the main destination countries, together with other countries, and especially France for European countries. So, as has been reviewed by Laurie, the paper that I am presenting now is obviously not the first paper to investigate the link between climate events and migration. So broadly speaking, the existing studies can be broadly categorized into two main categories, depending on their level of analysis on the one hand, and the way they measure climate change on the other hand. So focusing on the first discriminating factor, that is the level of analysis, what you have is on the one hand, cross-country analysis, which generally rely on large panel of countries and use decennial averages of net migration flows over quite long period of time. And on the other hand, you have micro or local studies. Both types of studies have some limitations. The former ones rely on highly aggregated data and neglect within country heterogeneity. And the latter ones are generally based on household surveys, which cover a limited number of households and communities, which restrain the diversity of observed climatic conditions, right? And in addition to this, they generally rely on panel data with short time dimension and hence fail to identify long-term trends in migration patterns. So what we do here is we try to overcome these limitations by using two sources of data. First, population data taken from the three latest population censuses conducted in Mali in 1987, 1998, and 2009. And what we do more precisely is we rely on population increments between censuses at the locality level to infer net migration rates. And then we combine these data with climate data in order to assess the impact of weather anomalies on migration patterns. So with regards to the climate indicator, we use what is called the SPEI, the Standardized Precipitation Evapotranspiration Index, which takes into account not only rainfalls, but also temperature and the capacity, the ability of the soil to retain water, which is this evapotranspiration term. And this index is expressed in standard deviation above or below historical values in a given location, right? So just to give you a sense of how these SPEI index has evolved over time in the case of Mali. So this figure displays the average SPEI values for Mali over quite a long period, starting in 1967 to 2009. So as you can see, the figure shows very large fluctuations over the period with dominance of dry events. Okay, and this is attested by the number of SPEI values which are below this historical value, which is here set at 0. Anomalies, as you can see, are particularly striking in years 73 and 74, which correspond to the big drought in the Sahel, 82, 84, and 2002. Okay, and during these, for these given years, SPEI values correspond to very severe droughts. Right, so outside these sub-periods, what you can see is that on average, SPEI values are mostly negative with a few exceptions. And this explains why in what follows, we will mainly focus on dry events, right, in our analysis. Another illustration is here on this map, the distribution of SPE values across the Malian territory, right, in a given at a given date, which is May 2009. And as you can see, there is substantial variation with regard to these values. These last graph, these last maps, sorry, show you the frequency of dry agricultural seasons for each intercensual period and each Malian municipality. So the darker the red color, the higher the number of dry years. So as is made very clear from the comparison of the different periods that you have on these three different maps, the 1977-87 period was on average much drier than the two next ones, which corresponds to our two periods of analysis. So that's for climate events. So let's move on and let me give you a few flavor of net migration rates computed using the population censuses. So what you have here on these two maps is a view of net migration rates over the first intercensual period that we have among men of active age, age 2069. What you have on the left-hand side is a map of urban localities, and black points corresponds to positive net migration rate, which means that you have more people entering into these localities and people moving out of these localities, and the other points corresponds to negative migration rates. And you have both exactly the same explanation for the map on the right-hand side, which corresponds to rural localities. You have here exactly the same two maps for the next intercensual periods, ranging from 1998 to 2009. And these are the two maps relating to international immigration rates over the 2004-2009 period. And these data are taken from the latest census. Right, so what we do in the paper is different things. We first regress these local net migration rates that we computed at this highly disaggregated level corresponding to localities in Mali, so during each intercensual period, on these variable that we computed, which is the number of dry years over exactly the same intercensual periods. So here is a snapshot of results, and if you remember what Laurie said earlier, as you will see, the results we find are very coherent with what she said. That is, what we find is much more internal migration resulting from these dry years than international one. Okay, and focusing on internal migration, what we find is that when a given area is hit by dry episodes, okay, rural localities which are situated in this area experience a decrease in net migration rate. That is, there are more people who leave these localities than people who join it, right? And the opposite trend is observed in urban localities, right? So that means that dry events tend to increase, accelerate rural urban migration. Okay? This effect is found to be the strongest for younger men of aged 20-29, and this effect is found to decrease with age for men. Okay? We don't observe such decreasing pattern for women, and for women, what we get is net migration rates in urban localities, which are found to increase with the frequency of dry episodes, whatever the age cohort. What we do then, based on these results, what we do is we try to use our regression result to estimate the additional number of migrants resulting from the drought episodes that hit Mali between 1998 and 2009. And doing this exercise, what we get is that over this period of time, so between 1998 and 2009, drought episodes that hit Mali translated into an additional net outflow of about 7,100 male and 6,300 female rural migrants of active age per year. What we do next is we assess the impact of drought frequency on international migration rates. Okay? So again, what we find is that drought frequency in the last 5 years increased international migration rates, whether one considers all destination countries altogether, or whether we make a distinction between different groups of destination countries, mutually exclusive groups, in particular, whether you consider neighboring African countries or OECD countries or France, which is one of the main destinations of Malian migrants abroad. And this increase is much higher when one concentrates on migration outflows to neighboring countries, and then lower and lower when the focus is on outflows to non-neighboring African countries and France. If we look at international migration rates towards OECD countries, what we find is that drought frequency is not always significant, and when it is, it has a negative sign, right, which would suggest that dry agricultural season actually reduces migration outflows to these countries, which suggests that maybe this way of categorizing destination countries is a way to capture the cost of migration, right? And when you have dry season, it reduces, through the income channel, it reduces the capacity of people to move to these distant countries. And again, using these regression results, we estimate the total volume of additional international moves induced by droughts, and we estimate these additional volume of international migrants at 2,000 persons per year over this 2004-2009 period. Last, what we do is we push forward these analyses in order to test for the existence of a between group or between region heterogeneity in climate effects. Okay, so what we do first is we look at we first assess, to what extent the agroecological context matters in this drought migration relationship. Remember, in Mali, you have basically 3 main zones, right, which are very different in terms of the level of rainfall they get. And our prior was that in rural localities, which are located in the northern part of the country, where agroecological conditions are quite difficult and not really favorable to agriculture, and hence where there is not much availability of on-farm adaptation strategy, we expect that drier years should be associated with higher migration, and we do find some differentiated drought effects depending on the agroecological zone, with the size of climate effects on migration in the northern part of the country, suggesting that in some localities, thresholds or tipping points may be reached, so that people living there have little choice but to move when SPEI values deviate from their normal values. We also find that crop diversification matters. That is, in localities where crop diversification is the highest, which constitutes a kind of way for people to diversify the level of risk. One additional dry agricultural season has a negligible impact on net migration rates, while the reverse holds true in places where this crop diversification is very low. We also find that climate effects strongly vary by locality wealth, right? And they are the strongest for poorer localities, and then progressively diminish with wealth. This is true for internal migration, but with regards international migration rates, no such clear pattern emerges. Okay? And in particular, we find that international migration towards non-neighboring African countries, that is towards distant countries, these international migration tend to increase with drought frequency, but only in the richest localities. Okay? And this may be the sign that there might be a poverty constraint, a liquidity constraints on long distance migration. As a conclusion, the paper suggests that for people in all areas that are facing adverse climatic conditions, one of the options is to migrate to urban areas. So this is an important climate urbanization link that has been emphasized in previous works, and that has been emphasized, I think, by the talk by Flore. That there are also significant climate effects on international moves, whatever the country of destination, but the size of the effect is much smaller. And I think this gives a picture that is, in a sense, much less worrying than the current narrative suggests, at least in OECD countries. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Flore, for this very interesting presentation, which really illustrates the huge effort that you have made with your co-authors in compiling this data on Mali. And this is really, I think we will have an interesting Q&A session afterwards on this topic.